In this episode of Cars Plus, we're going to cover the assembly of the instrument panel for Graham 1938 to 1940 Spirit of Motion cars, also known as Sharknose Grahams. We'll cover all parts save the speedometer and clock as they vary through the years. First part we're going to install, which is really a sub-assembly. This is the radio grill sub-assembly. Goes right here. You can see these series of holes that we have. We've already got all of our hardware figured out for this assembly. All the plastic here, this is all repro plastic that we did here, that I make because every single piece of original plastic is shot. The ashtray front itself, this and this part are much older but still usable, so they're being used as is. I gotta wipe a little junk off of it, but they look very nice, and we're going to put this part in place now. Back in the day, just so you know, all I ever did was have non-Phillips screws. We just got regular blade screws. That's all you ever get back then. This is prior to World War II. There are some Phillips screws prior to World War II, but they're very rare, so you're not normally going to see them. So we'll take all our screws out and then we'll install it. These are all original screws. They've been shot with silver cad. We have brand new lock washers. These little keepers, these are all original Graham keepers that are used to push them on. They don't want to come back off easy. They're little spring-loaded clips. That's how they put the unit back together when they were doing it originally. When you look at your ashtray here, which the center is removable, these are the exact style of screws that they would have used back in the day. So this looks just like it was supposed to look. This end, you'll notice we have a special screw. That is a very special screw that is quite different, and it's made specifically for holding the glove box arm. At this point, it's going to be a little bit front heavy. For those who are wondering, the sort of black on most of the back, there's a little bit of sanding mess I've got to clean up, but the blackened kind of metal is a rust conversion coating that was sprayed. Reason for that is we didn't want to lose the factory chalk marks on the back top of this instrument panel. On the instrument panel, there are two assemblies just like this, one for each side. This is a Zamak casting. So is this upper piece of Zamak casting. What this is your window defroster. So back in 1938, Graham had window defrosters. They include a washer and a flat blade screw on each side. Now I've pre-made up the assemblies. Now I'm going to install them. And I'll show you the way one goes in. I'll put the other one in off camera. It's a lot to hold with just two hands, but we'll eventually get it. There you can see what you end up with pointing at the windshield. You do have to have your vent pointing this way. You cannot point it the other way, so it must point this way so you can hook up to your heater eventually. Next up, we have an optional item. We have a heater switch. This is a pretty fancy heater switch because it's got a removable lighted knob and a little 6-volt light inside of it. Whenever you're mounting something like a heater switch, it's probably going to have 2 of these spots that you can unscrew thin nuts. And you see it has a flat side here and a rounded side. Flat side goes to the inside. Now I may have to adjust this a bit because I'd like this to come out looking real nice. And I'm going to have to. I have too much of the threads showing, so we'll bring up our, see if we can bring up this nut. If we can't, we'll go over here and I'll see what I can do with a wrench. That other nut doesn't want to move, so we're going to have a little bit of thread reveal, and that's the way it's going to be. Because I'm not going to crank on it because the body is made of ceramic. So it's not a good idea. That's a 3/4 nut. So nice little tightening up for that. Pop out my light so I can see how it goes back together. This only goes one way, and that's a little bit hard to find. Oh, I think it's over here. There it is. Got it. There we go. Now you see it turns like that to change it. And when you turn on, it will light up to remind you it's on. Now we're going to put in the primary light switch. That's this switch here. This being the hole that accepts the ferrule and the rod. Primary light switch goes in that hole. Notice I'm taking this around and putting it so the little hole is up above. Now a thing to note before we do this is this rod has to go in here, and the ferrule is going to go through here, and we have a nut that has to go on the rod and come in from this side. So let's put our ferrule through here. There we go. At least got the two together. And we'll put our nut on here and get it started, hopefully. There, we'll get it started. Now we want to get our rod in here first before we tighten that up, or we're going to have troubles doing it. Make sure it's in our slot, which it is. Get our orientation right. At least for most of it, you can hand tighten it. Then you'll have to get yourself a wrench to finish it off. In this case, you have to finish with a 9/16 wrench because that is the size of the nut. Alright, got good and tight. Right here would be your choke on the car. You notice it's a hole that's round on the bottom slot and vertical sides. That's what you use for something like this particular ferrule. This was a choke, but of course it's broken off. We're going to have to deal with this problem later. We are going to mount it for now, so we've got it with the instrument panel. But we will deal with putting a new choke cable on this a bit in the future. I should probably show you this nut. This is just a stamp style nut. You'll find this used a number of times in old vehicles. Works like a regular nut, except it's just a piece of stamped steel. I suppose it's a way of saving money, maybe? Not quite sure. I'll flip it up so I can better see what I'm doing. Because having but one effective thread, you want to get it on here just right. Pretty much goes on finger tight, and then at the last minute you'll want to tighten it up with a wrench just a little bit so it stays nice and tight. On each end of the instrument panel you have a Zamak Die-Cast piece. Would have been a very expensive thing back in the day, but these are both die-cast, a right and a left. And they have on the back of them 5 points to mount. They're 1032. At each point you're going to want a screw and a lock washer and then a washer to assemble it. I'm going to assemble them onto the instrument panel, then I'll show you from the back as well as you'll see from the front how they are positioned. Here you have the finished back of how the assembly will look. They're very large holes, so you really have to have the washers and position things. Your line on this side is where the edge of your zinc die casting is, and you'll see all that when it's turned over. Here you can see the instrument panel at this stage depicting both, the one on the passenger side and the one on the driver's side for those Zamak castings as installed, as well as the other parts that we've installed to this point. This particular Graham is being equipped with a high-end radio. There were two radios back in 1939 available, the standard one or the preselect one. This is the preselect one. The unit mounts using this hole, this hole, this hole, and this hole, and these are all going to be 1032s. They're going to be used here. So we're going to mount the point where the head gets mounted to later at this point. One of the things is you'll notice there's two levels here, so you're going to need to add a washer right there on each side. They have to have washers in there. In addition to washers on the back, lock washers, and also your screws and nuts. So you'll use screws and nuts here. These two screw in to the unit itself. And what we'll do is we'll position it up here, and we're going to just sort of rough it in for the moment because we have to get the exact right screws. We're using stainless again because if we're going to do this and we want this car to last, for this usage, stainless is a good idea. And for now, I am using 1032s that have got Phillips heads because I have to order the exact correct ones without Phillips heads for the final install. First, as you can see, I'm just hanging it. I'm going to let it come down here. We'll get the other end hung on there. Screw, lock washer, and washer. This will just let us rough it in. And then we can finish the final install when we have the correct hardware in stock. We're going to have to slide a washer underneath, then put our screw through the hole, catch our washer also. That way this will balance out, end up level. And we have to have a washer on the opposite side, another lock washer, and our nut. Next up, we're going to add the secondary light switch, which is right here. That is this component we've got. Uses a ferrule, a inside lock washer, and a rod into the switch. You can see how the switch should be positioned so you can get both of the screws. Down here is your hand throttle, so you have to have room for the hand throttle. I have to tighten up the 9/16 nut the rest of the way. Next up, we're going to add the glove box door spring. Now, if you've been paying attention, you've already figured out that the way they built this dash, it can be flipped either way. This could be the instrument side, or it could be the glove box side. Same thing with the opposite side. Because Graham was building export cars for countries that had right-hand drive, at the same time they were building the cars for the United States with the left-hand drive. This assembles with 1/2-inch slotted screws, a lock washer, and a nut. The screws here are 1032. In this case, they would have been originally chrome plated. We've polished them up because these are stainless, which is a little cheaper than the chrome plated ones. And furthermore, the spring itself was also originally chrome plated, so this one had to be re-chrome plated. They're usually pretty worn. Next up, we need to put in the lock for the glove box. Now these units, which you have to pry them back to take them off, this one's good enough to reuse both in chrome and the fact that we've got the various pieces here. When you go to put them in, very carefully bend your pieces back, because the fact of the matter is if somebody ever wants to do this again, you hope they're going to be able to do it. But if you don't bend them back, this won't stay in place. So we're going to have to bend them back a little. We're going to work on this with a screwdriver. Get them bent back up in here enough to hold it. That doesn't mean I will bend every one of them all the way over, because I won't have to, but I do have to bend them up enough so it'll stay in place, and also so I can put a nut in here. Here's the lock assembly. It has 2 nuts on it. One's already on, the other one goes here. The issue is, though, there's a little metal shelf back here that this has to go on top of the metal shelf because this goes under the metal shelf. So first, we bring it up and see if it's the right height, which we've already preset our bottom nut so it's the right height for coming out right with our little surround for our lock. And now we've got to take this out, slide in our nut, get it centered up, and carefully put the whole thing together. Here I'm looking at the back of the instrument panel with this latch installed. Here's the shelf I'm talking about. This is the shelf piece. It's just something that they put in here with spot welds so they could do it on either side. On the top of the shelf goes the one nut. Because of the assembly and the fact that it goes into a hole that holds it is not round, it's got a round edge and straights on the side, you have to put it up in there and very carefully, where I'm pointing, bring that top nut down. And it's very difficult to do. Once you get it down, then you bring your bottom nut up as a jam nut. Now, in case you don't have the right wrench and you really want to do this outside of the car, you're going to use an 1.1 wrench, which this is an 1.1 wrench, but it's huge. It's about 15 inches long. Or you could use an expandable pliers like my Irwin here. But it is an 1.1 nut that you're working with. And you need to get it good and tight, Also remember, since you got a latch on the other side, you want to keep this latch in the center, so you may have to hold on to the latch as you are tightening everything up. On the underside of the instrument panel, you have this assembly, which consists of 4 screws. They were not Phillips. These are our mock-up screws. We've got slotted screws coming for the entire assembly wherever they were incorrectly done on the previous restoration of this vehicle, or so-called restoration. Down here, we have the hinge assembly. The hinge assembly, this piece here, goes like that. It's the same way on both sides of the instrument panel. So it goes that way on this side and that way on the passenger side. You also have a hinge reinforcement piece. That's this one here, because otherwise the engineers at Graham felt on the glove box side it was probably going to break. Now this allows for you to flip down the instrument panel on the driver's side, and you would have your steering column in here. You'd have to put a towel there, but you can actually flip down the instrument panel against the steering column and work on the back of the panel in this car. So both sides are identical. The car is set up to be right or left-hand drive, so pretty much everything just flips back and forth. You use a 1032 3/4 inch screw. They should be slotted, as I said, and a lock washer and nut on the back side at the 4 points to set this up. This is the special screw we mentioned earlier in the video. It's got a shoulder and a large head and screws directly into your radio grill assembly. And you really do need the special screw. If you don't have one, you'd have to make one up, because I don't think you can find one to buy except in a whole parts car. But we've got the correct one here. And what it is for our glove box arm to go on. Screw and the arm are both plated in zinc originally. And screw it carefully back into place, and the arm rides on the shoulder. And so when we put on our glove box, it'll come down here, fold out in this area, and this folds up like this when the glove box is closed. Graham Page had 2 versions of this part. They were all really cast as you're looking at here. This is a large casting, does one piece. This side is for your ignition switch. This side is for your overdrive control, although most cars wouldn't have had overdrive. So what they do, they used a bandsaw at the factory, chop this side off, smooth it with sandpaper, and there you have got the standard part here. And all of them were really made for overdrive, but most cars didn't have overdrive, so they just lopped the side off. This goes for your steering column on the base of the instrument panel. Now on the back here, you see we didn't worry about getting rid of the pits or whatever, but there is a special clip here. This clip will hold your ignition switch in. Now right now we've just put this in finger tight so it's with the assembly, because we won't put the ignition switch in until we put the instrument panel in the car. This is a 1/4 screw, 1/2 inch long, and you have a lock washer. So that is what goes there. Without this clip, which this car was missing the clip, Kenny had to source one, you'll have kind of a hard time holding your ignition switch in place. Yes, you could make one of these if you had to. Now we're about to put in the hand throttle housing, not the actual cable inside of it, but we're going to put the hand throttle housing. Goes right here. And a couple of unique things about the hand throttle to tell you about. One, you can see it has flat sides, round top and bottom. So you do need the special fitting that they're using. And it goes in this hole. Slide it in. You got your nut here. It's a stamped nut again. And that screws on the back. And since it's a stamped nut, you got to be real careful because you don't want to cross thread that. But the other thing to know is this part turns out to be the same housing used in 1937. The difference is not the housing. The difference is in what they had for a cable and a knob. Here we have the 37 style knob along with its attached wire. So that's not going to be used, and this spins on here, and I'm not sure of a way to take it off. So we'll just go buy a modern choke cable and use the wire and this portion of the choke cable and put a Graham knob appropriate for 39 onto it. Here we have assembled the instrument panel just as we did the panel that was for our glove box previously. So all of this assembles the same way. Notice the instruments are mounted with 1032 nuts and lock washers. We have not yet installed the speedometer cluster. Now remember, I told you that you could have the glove box here and the instrument panel there, or vice versa. So this is the left-hand version of driving the car. The other would be the right-hand version. The difference is going to be here, though, is that we have two threaded holes here, one here, and they're going to use 1032 half-inch screws along with a washer and lock washer, and that's going to go through these holes right there and right there. That will allow the instrument panel to be fastened in place. That's how you take it undone when you want to take it undone. Now you notice it does hinge just like the glove box, so if the steering column were in here, you could hinge it against the steering column, but you have to put something in here to hold it. There is no arm for this panel, but it is a handy way to work on it, but you must be very careful when you're working on it. So that's how it goes when it's up. I'll put in the screws off camera, but that will fasten this side of the instrument panel together. As you can see, we now have three of the knobs dealt with. The lower knob on this side is the hand throttle. This is a 1937 housing and escutcheon. Pull this out a little bit so you can see the escutcheon. Behind there, there's the escutcheon. Inside, we needed to replace the cable because I couldn't come up with a way to take that 37 knob off of the existent cable. You can get from Dorman this particular item, 55196. It's a replacement choke cable. That allowed us to have the insides we need. We had to cut off the knob, make some knurled ends on the shaft in here, and we glued on with JB Weld the reproduction knob, so now that it matches. And you have a hand throttle, spin left long so that we can adjust it when we put it in the car. Over here, the same thing is going to be done because, as we've seen in other cars, the rest of the choke cable is missing in this car, so we're going to substitute the other Dorman cable kit for this one and have both the cable and the housing, and we already have the knob made, and so we'll put that on, and they'll end up with you 4 matching knobs like they should be. Here we have the hole for our cigarette lighter. This being the cigarette lighter, when whoever worked on this car in the past had done it, they didn't have a holder for putting this in. They rigged up something to make it stay there, but it wasn't the right way at all. So we made up a holder out of aluminum. It doesn't have to be beautiful. You're not going to see it. It just has to hold this socket in that hole in position. They were also missing the correct PAL nut, and to get one of these, that was fairly hard to get, at least to get one. Got the PAL nut from somebody called Spemco. Part number 2014, quantity, I could buy one. And this is the order number down here. But I got that part, which was very necessary because the thread here is a very odd thread and really does require a correct PAL nut. So all I'm going to do is take the PAL nut off, take this off, slide this in, slide everything on, tighten it up. That'll be the end of putting in the cigarette lighter. One cigarette lighter installed.